Bloomberg Audio Studios. Podcasts, radio, news.
This is the Bloomberg Daybreak Europe podcast. Good morning. It's Tuesday, the 9th of September. I'm Caroline Hepker in London.
And I'm Stephen Carroll in Paris, where Emmanuel Macron is running out of options as he looks to appoint the 7th Prime Minister of his presidency after the country's government collapses once again.
And in other news, Democrats release an alleged birthday note they say Donald Trump sent to the disgraced financier Jeffrey Epstein. Plus, power and politics. Britain's plan to become a green energy superpower faces a growing right-wing backlash. Let's start with a roundup of our top stories. France's President Emmanuel Macron is searching for a new Prime Minister after Francois Bayrou lost a confidence vote in Parliament. The outgoing Premier will present his government's resignation to the President later this morning after failing to win support for his deficit-cutting plans. Bruno Retailleau, who leads the centre-right Republicans Party and served as Interior Minister in the Bayrou government, says the President must act swiftly.
The problem now is that we will first need a Prime Minister as soon as possible because we are heading into difficult days and France needs a budget.
Bruno Retailleau speaking there via a translator. The market reaction has been muted as investors had expected the downfall of the government. Macron is now seeking a 5th Prime Minister in less than 2 years. In a statement, the President says he will appoint a new Premier in the coming days. Norway's Labour Prime Minister Jonas Gahr Støre has declared victory in a national election after seeing off a surge of support for the populist right. The country's centre-left minority government won a second term in power, securing just over half of all seats in the legislature. The anti-immigration Progress Party secured its best result on record, with about 24% of public backing in Norway versus 28% for the Prime Minister's party, in a campaign that was dominated by debates about welfare, taxes on wealth, and Norway's oil fund investments in Israel. In the US, House Democrats have released an alleged birthday note they say Donald Trump sent to the convicted paedophile Jeffrey Epstein as part of a book to celebrate his 50th birthday in 2003. The note includes the sign-off, "May every day be another wonderful secret," complete with the sketched outline of a woman's body. Trump has denied composing the message or that the note existed and has sued the Wall Street Journal's reporters, publisher and founder after it was initially reported in July. Bloomberg's Wendy Benjaminson explains some of the arguments about whether or not the letter is real.
We don't know if he really wrote it, but we do know that it was given to the House Oversight Committee under subpoena from the Epstein estate. They had it in the birthday book. They turned it over to Congress, and Democrats today released that letter. So there would have to be a lot of jujitsu going on for that letter to be manufactured. Also remember that House Republicans on the committee have seen it as well.
Bloomberg's Wendy Benjaminson speaking there. The release raises pressure on the president over questions about his past interactions with the late disgraced financier. Survivors of sexual abuse by Jeffrey Epstein are calling on Congress to release all files related to the case. US stocks have been on a record-breaking run in recent months, but JPMorgan says that the Fed's next move could sap investors' risk appetite. The lender's trading desk believes a September interest rate cut could turn into a, quote, sell the news event, with investors pulling back. In a separate warning, Goldman Sachs CEO David Solomon said that he's not convinced by the case for rapid rate cuts.
It doesn't feel to me like the policy rate is extraordinarily restrictive at the moment when you look at risk appetite. And so, risk appetite is definitely, out on what I'd say is the more exuberant end of the spectrum.
David Solomon's comments at a Barclays Financial Services conference. Meanwhile, a top economist at Citadel has shared his thoughts on the US economy. Angel Ubide, the hedge fund's head of economic research for fixed income and macro, says the US economy is on the good side of a, quote, fragile equilibrium, but warned we are, quote, close to the edge. Now, Rupert Murdoch and his children have settled litigation over the trust which controls his media empire. Under the agreement, Murdoch's eldest son, Lachlan, will remain in charge of the company. Bloomberg's Tiwa Adebayo has more.
It's the family dynasty which reportedly inspired hit TV series Succession. But it seems the Murdochs have elected to keep the drama on screen, settling on the future of their globe-spanning media empire. A new family company controlled by Lachlan Murdoch will have a voting stake in Fox and News Corp, whilst 3 of Murdoch's children will cease to be beneficiaries of the trust. Instead, Bloomberg understands Prudence, Elizabeth and James will each receive $1.1 billion. The agreement concludes a legal battle which started in 2023 when Rupert Murdoch first sought to change the family trust, putting Lachlan in control. News Corp and Fox will sell shares worth about $1.4 billion on behalf of the 3 children leaving the trust. In London, Tiwa Adebayo, Bloomberg Radio.
Now, European car makers, including Mercedes and Volkswagen, are railing against EU plans to phase out new combustion engine cars by 2035. The news comes as industry leaders at this week's Munich Auto Show promoted their new electric vehicles. Volkswagen CEO Oliver Blume told Bloomberg the company is working to expand its EV offering.
Yesterday it was a fantastic day being able to present our new electric urban family from Volkswagen, beside of a lot of new technologies. And our ambition is to provide technology for the people, and that's what we are doing now with the entry-level electric cars. We are market leader with 28% in the electric segment, and these new products will give us another push.
Volkswagen's Oliver Blume speaking there. He also told journalists that it would be unrealistic to expect to have 100% electric vehicles by 2035. His words come ahead of a summit on Friday between the European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen and heavyweights from the industry. German Chancellor Friedrich Merz, whose party has been critical of the phase-out, is scheduled to speak at the Munich show later today. So that on cars. Just lastly, Barclays CEO C.S. Venkatakrishnan has warned that a windfall tax on banks here in the UK could hinder the government's push to boost growth in the economy. Bloomberg's Ewan Potts has more now.
The Barclays CEO says that the route to growth is through investment and not through a bank tax. Speaking at a Barclays conference in New York, he also argued that UK lenders already pay a higher rate than their peers in the US and Europe. He warns that more tax would damage a sector that employs 10% of the population. The intervention comes after a recent think tank report said a higher bank levy could raise as much as £32 billion over the next 5 years. In London, I'm Ewan Potts, Bloomberg Radio.
And those are our top stories for you this morning. Let's take you through the markets. Global stocks climbing for a 5th day. Asian equities higher 0.5% on the MSCI Asia Pacific Index. This is after a surge in bets on US interest rates coming down. That has also helped the S&P 500 close near another record high on Monday. Stock futures for the US are also up, but US Stock 50 futures are down 0.25%, perhaps weighed down by the political issues in France. We'll be watching that French-German spread when things get going here in Europe later this morning. 10-year US Treasury yields trading at 4.04. Bloomberg Dollar Spot Index is down 0.1%. The euro is actually strengthening. Oil prices are up 0.7 for Brent and WTI crude futures. Those are the markets. Now, in a moment, we'll be bringing you the latest on the political chaos in France and also discuss why Britain's dreams of becoming a green superpower could be about to run into difficulties. Before that, though, another story that caught my eye, and this was all about the tube strike. Londoners flocking to Lime and Forest bikes and scooters yesterday. They were parked all over the pavements and spilling onto the roads in the city when I left the office yesterday. But it was interesting that Lime said that total trips during that 4-hour rush hour commute period yesterday jumped 58%. No surprise, but people also did travel further and for longer. I just say it's lucky the weather was fine. The tube strike is going to affect the whole of the capital for this week. RMT union saying, the disputes over pay and trying to cut back their working hours. They say that TfL, Transport for London, are being intransigent. And I see arguments now growing, at least by some newspaper columnists, in favour of going fully driverless for London Underground tube trains. I mean, some of the tube trains are sort of automated, and we do have one driverless train in the DLR, but actually it would cost a lot of money to try to transfer to driverless. Anyway, interesting argument. So that's one story I've been keeping an eye on. Right, let's go to France now, where President Emmanuel Macron will accept the resignation of Prime Minister Francois Bayrou later today. But what next? Our own Stephen Carroll is in Paris for us again today. You had a very long day yesterday, Stephen. Very interesting vote. Also lots of speeches in Parliament. Bayrou spoke at length about the challenges of debt that France faces. But the result did seem pretty inevitable, didn't it?
Yeah, I mean, look, the situation for Francois Bayrou hadn't really changed from the moment that he first called this vote 2 weeks prior versus when the actual votes came in the National Assembly last night. He used his speech to MPs to make the same warnings that he's been making for weeks or even years. France is drowning in a sea of debt. He talked about submitting to debt being like submitting to military force. He did also address some of the alternatives that some of the other parties have talked about in terms of how to close the deficit. He mentioned the taxes on the rich, which the opposition have called for, saying that calling for it, for those that are calling for it, forget that France needs investors, and if they raise taxes, people will simply leave. There was even a nod to the UK's change to non-dom rules, which he said it had created the immediate effect of exploding property prices in Milan. But ultimately, though, his warnings of dire consequences came to nothing. MPs voted as they said they would. He lost by a significant margin. He is the first Prime Minister to fall on a confidence vote in the Fifth French Republic since 1958. Another unhappy record for a Prime Minister under Emmanuel Macron, who is now looking for the 7th Prime Minister of his presidency and the 5th in 2 years.
Oh dear. Who will be Prime Minister next then in France?
Well, look, it's the president's prerogative to choose, and he can pick anyone that he likes. Some of the names that are being talked about now come from within the outgoing cabinet: the Defence Minister Sébastien Lecornu, the Labour Minister Catherine Vautrin, the Justice Minister Gérald Darmanin. But it's difficult to see how they could succeed where Barnier and Francois Bayrou failed in the last two governments to try and build some sort of working minority in the parliament to get measures passed. If he looked outside of his allies, the Socialist Party has said they're ready to govern. They were quick to offer their services after the vote yesterday, but that comes with conditions. They've proposed an alternative version of the budget that had been put forward by Francois Bayrou, which would involve a slower pace of spending cuts and measures like a wealth tax that would prove controversial to some. Bringing the Socialists on board may also cause splits among the coalition that Macron already has in place. The centre-right Republicans said they won't take part in a government that's led by the Socialist Party. Now, one name which has resurfaced, which might satisfy some of the demands, is Bernard Cazeneuve. He's a former Prime Minister under François Hollande, who distanced himself from the new generation of socialists. Macron considered him last December when he was looking for a Prime Minister as well. There's a question too as to when we'll know. Macron can take essentially as long as he wants to make this decision. I was comparing the statements from the Elysée last December and yesterday. In December, the statement said that Emmanuel Macron would name a Prime Minister in the coming days. They added a word to yesterday's statement, which is sort of translated as in the imminent coming days. Last time around, it took 9 days. So perhaps we can hope that there might be a decision made faster than that this time around.
Oh, okay. Side-by-side statement comparisons. I mean, that just shows you how we are kind of rinse and repeating this story in France. Surely the pressure on Emmanuel Macron is going to ratchet up even further. I mean, there have been calls for his resignation.
Yeah, indeed. The far left and the far right immediately repeated their calls for Emmanuel Macron to go after the confidence vote collapsed the government of Francois Bayrou. Emmanuel Macron's term, though, runs until 2027. He's given no indication that he plans to resign, and there's really no way to get rid of him as president, despite those calls from the significant blocs in the Parliament. It's worth, though, remembering the space the public have in all of this as well. There are two major protests planned in France. One is tomorrow, which is a movement that's been largely organised on social media called Let's Block Everything. And then a more formal demonstration organised by the unions, which is happening next week. Both are expected to cause major disruption to public services and transport. There are warnings, of course, that there could also be issues around, violence on the streets as well. That's something that some people are definitely worried about here too. Emmanuel Macron, for his part, will want to try and have an administration in place as soon as possible to deal with some of those pressing issues, not least to get on with work on the budget as well. But there's politics involved in all of this as well, because we have to think about how the next presidential election will play out. Emmanuel Macron will be thinking about who could replace him, who could take his place from a centrist candidate for that too. So the decisions that he makes now have an impact on that as well. Just think about Marine Le Pen and this too, the far-right president of the leader of their group in the National Assembly. She's currently barred from running for election after being found guilty of misuse of EU funds in a trial. Her appeal will be heard early next year, so we'll see whether or not she could be eligible by 2027, but an early election would potentially rule her out. Although, as I say, for the moment, no sign that Emmanuel Macron is going to respond to any of those calls for his resignation.
Stephen, thank you so much for being with us live from Paris. Bloomberg's Stephen Carroll then on the latest, what we're expecting in France. Thank you so much for being with us this morning. Stay with us. More from Bloomberg Daybreak Europe coming up after this. I want to turn our attention to the UK now. The Labour government's pledge to achieve a clean power grid by 2030. Keir Starmer's promise now faces a crucial economic test with a significant offshore wind subsidy auction, but also growing political challenges too. Joining me is Bloomberg's energy and climate change reporter, Will Mathis. Will, good to speak to you. I thought your piece, when I read it this morning, was just very interesting. Firstly, though, the basics. I mean, how important was this political promise, this campaign promise for clean power? And actually, what does it involve?
Yeah, this was one of the key promises during the campaign for the Labour Party. And it would involve, a transformation of the country's power grid in a way that no other country in the world has done yet. So it would really be a test case of whether it's feasible to do the kind of deep decarbonization of the power grid that many countries say they would like to do to reach their climate goals, but none really have even a plan to do it. So the UK has, come up with a plan and is trying to achieve it.
Okay. How does the government then deliver on this? Because it's a promise to both cut emissions and also to cut consumers' energy costs.
Yeah, those were two related promises. And, 5 years ago, it was easy to say that you could increase renewable power and cut costs, because wind power in particular, which is what the UK really needs, because, solar, you're not going to get solar power in the winter when people need the most electricity. And wind power, it used to be getting cheaper and cheaper, but during the pandemic, supply chain constraints and inflation just led costs to increase so much, and that really hasn't changed. The price of building a offshore wind farm, it just keeps getting more expensive. And so the idea now that you can cut costs and cut emissions from the power system by using offshore wind is looking a bit outdated. And it doesn't really seem like the government has reckoned with that. And what they are saying now more and more is that this is, protects us from the risk that gas prices could go up again, like they did a few years ago. And that's true, but it's also true that if gas prices come down, then the UK is looking increasingly expensive.
That's interesting. And also, as you say, it's looking like quite a vintage pledge, because the political headwinds have shifted. There's significant pressure to reverse course on green policies. I mean, from President Trump, other politicians, some corporates are also changing their stance now, aren't they?
Yeah, that's right. I mean, when Theresa May passed an amendment that enshrined the UK's net zero pledge into law, there was no dissent. It passed with a parliamentary procedure that doesn't require an actual vote. And it's really impossible to think that would happen today. You have the Conservative Party criticizing net zero, Nigel Farage and his Reform Party, which are leading the polls today, are obviously very anti-net zero, or even have talked about, getting rid of these contracts that have underpinned the drive for decarbonization. And that political consensus that existed in the UK for quite a long time, that, the country needs to do more and more to address climate change, has really cracked. And we're going to see what that means for the actual trajectory of policy in this country.
This is Bloomberg Daybreak Europe, your morning brief on the stories making news from London to Wall Street and beyond.
Look for us on your podcast feed every morning on Apple, Spotify and anywhere else you get your podcasts.
You can also listen live each morning on London DAB Radio, the Bloomberg Business app and Bloomberg.com.
Our flagship New York station is also available on your Amazon Alexa devices. Just say, Alexa, play Bloomberg 1130. I'm Caroline Hepker.
And I'm Stephen Carroll. Join us again tomorrow morning for all the news you need to start your day, right here on Bloomberg Daybreak Europe.